Minutes before everything went sideways, let me introduce you to Hoffman Roberto, or as we'll call him, Hoff. Hoff isn't just any guy. He's a Navy SEALs 321 Special Forces operator, one of the best in the business. But right now, he's not on some covert mission or leading a high-stakes operation. Instead, he's at home, laughing and joking around with his child, Rocker. For that moment, he's not a soldier. He's just a dad. Then there's Era, Hoff's adopted niece. She doesn't just see him as her uncle. To her, he's a trusted figure, someone she looks up to. Era joins in the fun, and for a while, everything feels like a picture-perfect family moment. They're playing, laughing, and simply enjoying life, just like any ordinary family. But Era's got somewhere to be, and she's running late. So, she turns to Hoff with a last-minute request. She asks him to braid her hair. Hoff can't believe it. A 17-year-old girl asking a Navy SEAL, a guy trained for the toughest missions on the planet, to braid her hair? It's almost comical. But Hoff being Hoff, he goes along with it. And guess what? He nails it. Era even compliments his braiding skills, saying his knots are pretty impressive. For someone who's more used to tying tactical knots than hair braids, that's not a bad compliment at all. Then Jessie, Hoff's wife, walked in and joined them. It was one of those moments that felt perfect. They all came together for a big family hug. Just a simple, beautiful moment. And then, everything changed. Out of nowhere, a huge impact of white light burst through. Hoff rushed to check outside, and it was chaos, complete madness. People were infected, turning into something unrecognizable. They weren't just sick. They were attacking each other, eating each other. Zombies. And they were heading straight for Hoff's house. But that wasn't even the worst part. In the middle of all this, Jessie, his wife, the love of his life, got infected. She turned. Before Hoff could process what was happening, she attacked him. Jessie bit down hard on his hand, trying to rip it off. It was complete chaos outside. Hoff's son, Rocker, was terrified. Hoff couldn't bring himself to kill Jessie, his infected wife, in front of his child. Instead, he yelled at Era to take Rocker down to the garage. But Jessie wasn't done. She lunged at Hoff, ripping a chunk of flesh from his arm. Era grabbed Rocker and rushed to the garage, while Hoff struggled to keep Jessie at bay. She came at him again, biting and clawing. But Hoff kept dodging, stepping back, trying to call out to her, trying to pull her back from whatever nightmare this was. He shouted her name, hoping for even a glimmer of recognition. But when her skin began to peel and her flesh started leaching out, Hoff realized the truth. Jessie was already gone. She pushed him hard against the wall, and a drawer slid open. Hoff spotted a gun inside. He froze, tears streaming down his face. Jessie, his wife, the mother of his son, was now a monster. But before he could act, something happened that left him speechless. Jessie paused. Even in her twisted state, she seemed to remember who Hoff was. Her trembling hands reached for the gun, and she pointed it at her own head. With a broken voice, she mumbled about Rocker and Era, apologizing. She told Hoff she loved him, and before he could say anything, she pulled the trigger. Jessie ended her own suffering. Now Hoff had to protect his kids. Rocker and Era were all he had left in this world of madness. But there was no time to grieve. The infection was spreading, and Hoff knew the bite on his arm might mean it was already inside him. Outside, the chaos only grew. People were fighting, desperate to board the ship docked nearby. That ship was their only hope, and Hoff wasn't about to let his kids get left behind. He pushed through the crowd with Era and Rocker, trying to keep them safe. Then, amidst the madness, a gray-haired woman approached. She offered to help. She looked at Era and told her she could carry Rocker to safety. Era hesitated, but eventually handed her brother over. The moment the woman took Rocker, her kind demeanor vanished. She smirked and bolted, running off with him. Hoff saw it happen and screamed at Era to stop her, but it was too late. The woman disappeared into the chaos, taking Rocker with her. Hoff felt his heart shatter. He had lost everything in one day. Era collapsed, sobbing and apologizing, blaming herself for what had just happened. Months had passed. Hoff stood in the restroom of the ship, staring at his infected arm. He cleaned the bite wound, wincing as waves of pain shot through him. like 1,000 needles slicing through every blood vessel and cell. The agony was unbearable. Was this slow zombification? Or was the radiation exposure holding the infection back, stopping it from spreading beyond his shoulder? Hoff didn't know. All he could do was endure. Then his mind wandered back to that moment, the woman who kidnapped Rocker. His anger boiled over, and with a roar, he slammed his fist into the mirror, shattering it into jagged shards. He promised himself, no matter what it took, he would find her. He would find his son. For months, Hoff had been on a relentless search. Through the swamps, forests, and zombie-infested corners of the ship, he'd left behind trails of blood and shattered bones. He didn't look back, not once, until that one time he did, and what he saw made his heart drop. Era, surrounded by zombies. Era apologized, blaming herself for losing Rocker. Hoff didn't hesitate. He raised his shotgun and took down the zombies one by one, clearing a path to her. When it was over, he pulled her into a hug, his voice steady but full of emotion. "It's not your fault," he told her. "It's mine. I should have been more careful." Back in the present, Era entered the restroom and asked about his arm. Hoff quickly covered it up as she reminded him people were waiting for him. Over the months, Hoff and Era had formed a small group of survivors. Together, they ventured deeper into the ship, scavenging for food and fighting to stay alive. Their group had 5 members. Era, who had studied military administration at a high school affiliated with the Navy SEALs, had a unique backstory. She was a foster child placed with Hoff's family when she was 7. At first, she was distant and wary, but Rocker's birth changed that. She became part of the family and grew into a strong and capable young woman. Hoff often reminded himself, family was everything. He had to protect Era, find Rocker, and get them off this cursed ship alive. The others in the group were David Katsun, a 35-year-old banquet chef from the ship, Masamoto Junichiro, a 27-year-old former Yakuza, and Adam Smith, a 65-year-old biology professor. As they searched for food, Masamoto's stomach growled loudly. David snapped at him, warning that the noise could attract zombies. But what could Masamoto do? He was starving. The argument started to heat up until Hoff shut them both down. Then it happened. A zombie burst from the floor and grabbed Masamoto by the face. Hoff moved like lightning. He slashed the zombie with his knife, kicked it to the ground, and delivered blow after brutal blow with his fists until it was no longer moving. The others were stunned, but Era didn't flinch. She'd seen Hoff like this before. But it was too late for Masamoto. The zombie's grip had infected him. As Masamoto began to turn, he called out for his mother, his voice desperate and broken. Hoff didn't hesitate. He dashed forward and beheaded him before the transformation was complete. The danger wasn't over. A zombie lunged at Adam, but before it could strike, Era fired her shotgun, taking it down. More zombies emerged from the floor, surrounding the group. Era's sharp aim took down 3 in quick succession while Hoff handled the rest. As they caught their breath, a thunderous noise echoed through the ship. Outside, a massive whale had landed on the deck, its enormous form creating a tremor that could be felt through the ship. The ship's gates creaked open, and after a month of being trapped, everyone rushed out to taste the fresh air. The crowd was wild, people shoving and pushing, desperate for freedom. But then they saw it, a massive whale, just lying there on the ground. For a moment, everyone forgot their misery. Food, a chance to finally fill their aching stomachs. But while others celebrated, Hoff had his eyes on 2 survivors, Kaimaru and Kuchak. There was something off about them, something in the way they carried themselves. Then Kuchak noticed Era. His eyes lit up like he hadn't seen a girl in forever. He made a comment, but Hoff was quick to step in, shutting him down with a cold warning. Plenty of people have lost their heads for talking like that. Things were about to get heated, but Kaimaru stepped in, apologizing for his buddy. "He's just excited," Kaimaru said, trying to smooth things over. Hoff wasn't buying it entirely, but he backed off for now. Even Era stood her ground like a total badass, not letting the situation rattle her. Then Hoff turned to the whale. He grabbed his knife and got to work, expertly slicing through the tough skin. With every precise cut, chunks of meat spilled out, fresh and glistening. David, the chef, stepped forward to inspect the meat. His face lit up. It was fresh and safe to eat. The crowd erupted in relief and excitement. But then something changed. Hoff noticed movement. The whale wasn't dead. He shouted at David to get back, but it was too late. The massive creature's jaws snapped open and swallowed David whole. Well, half of him. What remained of him hit the ground, and it was horrifying. And then came the real nightmare. Zombies started crawling out of the whale's belly, twisted and grotesque. These weren't the same zombies Hoff and the others had faced before. They were faster, more vicious. People screamed and ran for the ship, desperate to escape. Hoff, Era, Kaimaru, and Kuchak bolted for the door. But when they reached it, it was locked. Survivors inside had sealed it shut, leaving them out to die. Hoff's blood boiled. He swore right then and there that he'd hunt down every single one of those selfish cowards. Let me paint the scene for you. Chaos erupted as the zombies went wild, tearing into the survivors who couldn't escape in time. People were screaming, crying, and worse, those who were bitten started turning almost instantly, adding to the nightmare. Things got even worse. One desperate survivor outside smashed the door's window, trying to force his way in. But before he could get through, someone inside grabbed him and killed him on the spot. The insider turned to the rest of them and warned, "Stick your head through that window, and you'll end up just like him." Kaimaru tightened his grip on his knife, his eyes scanning the scene for a chance to strike. Meanwhile, Kuchak stood ready, holding his two axes like he was born for this moment. But then, one of the zombies lunged straight at Hoff and sank its teeth into his already infected arm. Hoff froze for a moment. The coldness of the bite was unlike anything he'd ever felt, and the zombie's grip was terrifyingly strong. Gathering his strength, he delivered a solid kick to its lower body, pushing it back. But the damage was already done. The zombie had ripped a chunk of flesh from his infected arm. Before Hoff could even process the pain, another zombie came at them. Era didn't hesitate. She fired her shotgun. The shot connected, but instead of the usual carnage, it only blew a chunk of the zombie's flesh away. No blood, no guts, just nothing. That's when it hit them. These zombies weren't like the others. Then, all at once, the remaining zombies turned their attention to Hoff. The zombies closed in on Hoff from every direction, but he moved like a predator, dodging every attack with precision. He was sharp, only striking back when he knew his knife could land a hit. Hoff was conserving his energy, but let's be real. It was two against an army. Era had his back, though, holding her ground like a true fighter. When a zombie got too close, Hoff didn't hesitate. He shoved his gun into its mouth and pulled the trigger. But here's the thing. It didn't die. Not with one shot. It took multiple rounds before it finally dropped. That's when they realized these zombies were tougher. Killing them wasn't going to be quick or easy. So Hoff and Era started unloading, firing at anything that moved. Bullets flew in every direction, but it wasn't enough. The horde just kept coming, their numbers growing by the second. Then it got worse. They got separated. Era was surrounded, overwhelmed by the infected. Hoff turned to Kaimaru and Kuchak, who were just standing there, watching, not lifting a finger. Hoff shouted at them, his voice filled with rage. "What are you doing? Are you just going to stand there and watch?" But they didn't move. They didn't care. Era's screams cut through the chaos as the zombies closed in. They bit her, tearing into her flesh. With her final breath, she cried out, "Hoff, help me." That's when something inside Hoff snapped. His eyes changed. It wasn't human anymore. His infected arm began to mutate, swelling with unimaginable strength. He grabbed multiple zombies and crushed them with his mutant hand. With his new mutant huge arm, what came next was nothing short of a massacre. Hoff tore through the horde, smashing and ripping the zombies apart like they were paper. The infection that had been slowly eating away at him, it had turned him into a monster. Hoff wasn't holding back anymore. With one massive slam of his infected arm, the ground shook like an earthquake, sending the zombies surrounding Era flying. The impact was so powerful that even the ship trembled under the force. Thankfully, Era was still alive, though badly injured. Hoff didn't waste a second. He scooped her up, cradling her like she was the most precious thing in the world. And even with one arm carrying her, he didn't stop. His mutated strength let him crush any zombie that dared to step in his way. As this chaos unfolded, Kaimaru and Kuchak stood back, their expressions eerily calm. They weren't surprised at all by Hoff's transformation. Turns out, this wasn't their first time encountering someone who was half zombie like him. Hoff wasn't holding back now. He grabbed a massive container, and with all his mutant strength, he started shoving zombies left and right, throwing them into the sea like they were nothing. Some of them didn't even make it that far, as Hoff made sure to kill them on the way. The sea turned red, stained with the blood of the infected. But as Hoff caught his breath and regained his senses, something hit him. His giant mutated arm. He couldn't understand it. He was just driven by rage. That's when Kaimaru stepped forward. He explained it all. Hoff was a half-zombie, a hybrid, which meant he was part monster. The realization hit Hoff like a ton of bricks, but he didn't let it distract him for long. He killed the remaining zombies and gently laid Era on the ground. But then something strange happened. Era's wounds began to heal. Hoff did not even realize this. Era, too, was a half-zombie. Hoff's focus shifted to Kaimaru. "Who are you?" he demanded. Kaimaru's response was chilling. "Depends. I might be your enemy." That was enough for Hoff. At this point, he considered everyone an enemy, except for his own people. He was done trusting anyone else. Before he could even react, Kaimaru dashed at him with blinding speed. In one swift move, Kaimaru kicked Hoff with enough power to make him unconscious. Turns out, Kaimaru wasn't just some random survivor. He was a half-zombie too. His mutant leg gave it away. Kaimaru wasn't done. He dragged Hoff's unconscious body while Kuchak carried Era. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were headed into a new territory inside the ship, a place Hoff might not even recognize. So, there they were. Kuchak and the others had Hoff chained to a table, his hands and legs restricted. Kuchak, ready to deal with Hoff's mutant arm, grabbed a chainsaw. He thought it was growing too big and needed to be cut off before it got out of control. As he revved up the chainsaw, Hoff suddenly woke up. His mind flashed back to everything that had happened so far, and he realized the situation wasn't as simple as it seemed. But before he could react, Kuchak started cutting into his mutant arm. Something strange happened then. Hoff's mutant arm started returning to its normal size. It was like it was healing itself, and the reason was clear. Hoff had regained his consciousness. That's when Kaimaru walked in. He told Kuchak and the others to stop messing with Hoff. He explained that Hoff had been unconscious for 3 whole days. Hoff, still disoriented, asked about Era, his daughter. Kaimaru told him to follow him, and that Era was okay. As Hoff was being untied, Kuchak casually explained that they were just messing with him. It wasn't a serious situation. It was just a prank to wake him up after he'd been out cold for so long. Hoff, still processing everything, could feel the power surging through his arm again. Kaimaru led Hoff to a place that looked like a dining hall, tables filled with people. And it wasn't just anyone here. Everyone called Kaimaru the boss. People were sitting down, eating the whale meat Hoff had fought so hard to chop up. Kaimaru also asked a woman named Kelly if she was doing okay. Kelly, despite being in a terrible state, replied that she was doing okay. Kaimaru explained that since Hoff helped get the whale meat, he was entitled to his share too. Afterward, Kaimaru took Hoff to another room, and Hoff's heart skipped a beat when he saw Era. She was lying in bed, sleeping and recovering. Adam, the biology professor, and a doctor were working on her, making sure she was okay. Hoff rushed to her side, pulling her into a tight hug, relieved to see she was fine. The doctor assured him that her wounds had healed and that she'd be up in no time. But then, Kaimaru dropped a bombshell. He told Hoff that Era, too, was a half-zombie. That news stunned Hoff, leaving him in disbelief. He wasn't the only one carrying this strange curse. The doctor explained something incredible about Era. Her recuperative abilities were off the charts. He even hinted that Era might have already been a half-zombie before stepping onto this ship. Crazy, right? Then Kaimaru jumped in, saying the word regenerated was more fitting than recovered, because Era's wounds didn't just heal, they were completely restored in record time. They had never seen anything like it. Kaimaru added another layer of mystery. They weren't sure how or when Era got infected, but they suspected it might have happened during the nuclear power plant explosion. Oh, and by the way, we found out Kuchak has a son named Jeremy. Now, Hoff couldn't shake off the growing suspicion in his head. He looked around, wondering if everyone on the ship might be half zombies too. So he asked Kaimara directly, "What are you?" Kaimara's answer was straightforward. "Considering we didn't kill you and instead took care of both you and Era, it's obvious we're not your enemies." Then came the bombshell. Kaimara revealed the mastermind behind this entire disaster, a man named Kazel Tutmas. The moment Hoff heard that name, he stood up, furious. As a Navy SEALs 321 Special Forces operator, Hoff knew exactly who Kazel was. Now, let's rewind a bit and see how all this chaos started. Kazel Tutmas, leader of the Phoenix Group, was broadcasting a program that aired across the entire country. He introduced something called the E Project, which he described as the next-generation national defense strategy. Kazel went on about how humanity has been in constant war since its creation. He talked about dispatching troops to conflict zones and addressed those who'd lost their children or spouses on the battlefield. Calling war a battleground of madness, Kazel claimed his E-Project would eliminate death on the battlefield entirely. To demonstrate, Kazel showed off a unit of young experimental subjects. And then, in a move that stunned everyone, he pointed a gun at one of the subjects. "This is not a human," he said. "Not a living being. It's nothing but a lump of protein, cultivated in a lab." He fired the gun, but the subject didn't die. The bullet barely grazed the surface, leaving no significant impact. Kazel proudly announced that this would become the ultimate weapon to protect families. No more loved ones sacrificed in war. But not everyone was sold on this idea. One government official raised the ethical and moral implications of experimenting on these subjects. Kazel shut the argument down instantly. "Is that a question for people who've buried their children or their fathers on blood-soaked battlefields?" he asked. "How do you repay someone for the loss of their loved ones?" He kept pushing, saying enemy countries were already developing weapons that exploited their weaknesses. "We must stop wasting time on these endless debates about ethics and morals," Kazel shouted. "We need to become a powerful nation that can suppress war." And with that, the crowd erupted in cheers. Kazel and the Phoenix Group had just secured the nation's support for the E-Project. Oh, and don't forget that experimental subject Kazel shot during the broadcast. Trust me, you'll want to keep an eye on him. He's going to play a massive role in the events to come. After the program aired, the government and the Phoenix Group formed a solid agreement. With massive financial and administrative support, the E-Project kicked into full gear. Before long, they began assigning units of experimental subjects, young boys created through gene manipulation and purification, to various military stations. Hoff's first impression of these kids? They didn't look like soldiers in training. They looked like lifeless wooden dolls, stripped of any emotions or personality. It was unsettling, to say the least. But things weren't as polished as Phoenix had shown on national TV. Contrary to their claims, most of the experimental subjects, aside from a few exceptions, suffered from strange illnesses. Many became too weak to undergo military training. Among them was the boy Hoff recognized from the broadcast, the one we'll call Lucky Boy, since that's what Hoff nicknamed him. Lucky Boy was visibly exhausted and unwell. Hoff, feeling a twinge of compassion, patted his head, removed his helmet, and said, "Good work. Go get treated. I'll see you later." Lucky Boy's identification code was FN30A. He boarded a bus along with the other 6 subjects. As the bus drove off, Hoff turned to the Vice Minister of National Defense and asked something that had been bothering him. "What happens to the sick kids you send back to Phoenix? How come none of them ever come back here?" The Vice Minister's response? Cold and chilling. "Either way, they're just guinea pigs." He explained that unsatisfactory subjects were discarded as a precaution against virus infections or other complications. By discarded, he meant killed. Hoff, disturbed, pointed out what he'd noticed during their training. Those kids might be a bit slow to develop physically, but their cognition and thought processes are forming. If they're killed, isn't that murder? The Vice Minister dismissed him with a shrug. Even if it is, it's better to say they were discarded and leave it at that. Murder is a term reserved for humans. Then came the horrifying scene. When the bus carrying the 6 subjects arrived at its destination, soldiers were already waiting. They ordered the kids to line up and corralled them into a room. The doors shut, trapping them inside. Moments later, flames engulfed the entire space. As the room burned, something haunting happened. Lucky Boy, despite being consumed by the flames, smiled. It wasn't the smile of fear or agony. It was a calm, eerie smile that stunned everyone who witnessed it. Jumping back to the present, Hoff continued to explain. After his confrontation with the vice minister, his suspicions were confirmed. They were incinerating the experimental subjects. Even worse, Hoff had heard rumors that some of these kids were still alive and fully conscious, smiling as they burned to death, completely unaware of their fate. Hearing this, Kimura froze. He realized something significant, but whatever it was, we'll have to wait to find out. Hearing about the fate of the experimental subjects left everyone in the room silent and heavy-hearted. It was a tragedy that couldn't be ignored. That's when Kuchak's son, Jeremy, stepped forward. He looked at Hoff and said, "You should have saved them. You could have done something." Hoff didn't get angry. Instead, he gave Jeremy a small smile and patted his shoulder. "You're right, but I wasn't any better. I stood by, just like everyone else. I was both an assailant and a bystander to what happened to those kids." Adam then shared something personal with Kaimaru. He revealed that Hoff had lost his own son. Hearing this, Kaimaru immediately offered to help Hoff find him. It was a moment of solidarity, one that gave Hoff a small glimmer of hope. Before leaving the room, Kaimaru, Kuchak, and the doctor told Hoff and Adam to get some rest. They left behind some whale meat for Hoff to eat, but Hoff didn't feel like eating. His appetite was gone, even though his body was clearly hungry. Adam, sitting nearby, spoke up. "I'm sorry, Hoff. I wasn't there to fight alongside you and Era when the zombies attacked. I was so scared, I ran away." Hoff didn't respond immediately. He just grabbed a piece of the whale meat and tried to eat it. But the moment he swallowed, he felt his stomach churn, and he vomited it all out. Adam looked at him and explained, "You haven't had a sip of water in days. Eating something this heavy all of a sudden probably upset your stomach." But there was more to it. Hoff wasn't just hungry, there was something deeper going on. Something that stopped him from being able to eat regular meat. Still feeling uneasy, Hoff left the room. He walked down the hallway, carrying the chunk of meat with him. He tried again to eat it, but once more, his stomach rejected it, and he threw it up. As he wiped his mouth, a faint sound caught his attention. It was the unmistakable buzz of a chainsaw, coming from the same room he had just left earlier. Alarmed, Hoff rushed back to check what was going on. He pushed open the door, and what he saw froze him in place. Kuchak and his friends were gathered in the room, but they weren't eating whale meat anymore. They were eating a person. It was Kelly, the same woman Kaimaru had asked about earlier, checking if she was okay. The scene was horrifying. The realization hit Hoff like a brick. Hoff stepped forward, his voice sharp and filled with anger. "How could you do this? Eating a human? Someone who was your comrade?" Kuchak didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped up to Hoff, eating the flesh of Kelly on his face. "Why not? She's dead, isn't she? Meat is meat." It was clear that Kuchak wasn't going to back down. As the tension in the room grew, Kuchak's demeanor began to shift. His body started to change. He was transforming. Turns out, Kuchak was also a half-zombie. And as his monstrous side started to surface, the others in the room lunged at Hoff, ready to fight. Hoff moved fast. He punched Kuchak square in the face, sending him stumbling back for a moment, and followed it up with a swift kick to the side of another attacker. But the chaos wasn't over. One of the men grabbed a gun and started shooting. The bullets weren't aimed directly at Hoff, but he didn't wait to find out why. He dashed forward, grabbed the gun from the man's hands, and sneered, "Amateur." With the gun in his grip, Hoff quickly subdued the attacker and turned the weapon on another man, taking him out with precise shots. But Kuchak, now fully transformed, was an entirely different problem. His hulking form towered over Hoff, his body resembling a grotesque, infected monster. Before Hoff could react, Kuchak grabbed him with one massive hand and slammed him against the wall with enough force to crack it. Kuchak leaned in close, his voice cold and menacing. Flex your core, soldier, or you'll be gagging on your own organs spilling out of your mouth. Then came the punch. A brutal, bone-crushing blow to Hoff's core that shattered the wall behind him and sent shockwaves through his entire body. The pain was excruciating. It felt like Hoff's very cells were being ripped apart one by one. But even after taking such a devastating hit, Hoff refused to go down. Still trembling from the impact, he raised the gun and aimed it at Kuchak. His hands shook, but his resolve didn't falter. He pulled the trigger, landing a shot that made Kuchak stagger back, though it didn't stop him completely. At that moment, Kaimaru burst into the room. He looked around, taking in the scene of chaos. What's going on here? Kuchak pointed at Hoff, his voice dripping with annoyance. This guy came snooping around? Kaimaru sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. And that's why I told you to be cautious when deboning. Hoff didn't hesitate. He aimed his gun at Kaimaru and fired. But Kaimaru moved with insane speed, dashing forward and twisting the barrel of the gun like it was made of plastic. Since you're here, Kaimaru said coldly, we have two choices, convince you or kill you. Before Hoff could even respond, Kaimaru's body began to change. A mutant red armor engulfed him, making him look like something out of a nightmare. Kaimaru warned, take a deep breath, soldier. If you don't, you might not survive what's coming next. Hoff knew this fight wasn't one he could win with just human strength. His skills, honed over years, felt useless against these monsters. He racked his brain, desperate to find a way to transform his arm into the mutant form he'd used before. Kaimaru didn't give him time to think. With blinding speed, he lunged at Hoff, delivering a devastating kick. Hoff managed to block it with his arms, but the force was so intense, one of his arms broke instantly. Hoff slammed into the wall, and as he hit the ground, something horrifying happened. Pieces of flesh, human flesh, fell from the cracks in the walls and ceiling. Kaimaru didn't stop. He lunged again, this time delivering a bone-shattering punch straight to Hoff's core. Kuchak, standing nearby, sneered, I told you to flex your muscles or you die. Guess you didn't listen. Kaimaru stood over Hoff and smirked. Angry, are we? I bet you figured out why you can't eat regular meat anymore. That's when it hit Hoff. Half-zombies like him couldn't survive on normal food. They needed human flesh. Kaimaru continued, mocking him further. And what do you think about this blood-drenched restaurant? Hoff's eyes scanned the room, and the horrifying truth sank in. The place was a slaughterhouse, a human farm. Flesh, organs, and other remains were everywhere, scattered like trophies. Fury boiled inside Hoff. His breathing grew ragged, and his vision blurred with rage. His arms started to transform, the mutant power taking over. But hold on, this human farm? There's a bigger story behind it, and trust me, it's not what you think. We'll get to that soon. Hoff's mutant arm had fully evolved. The jagged, rough look it had just a few days ago was gone, replaced with a sleek, deadly design that radiated raw power. Kaimaru and Kuchak, standing before him, seemed eager to test just how strong he had become. Fuming with anger, Hoff pointed at them. You're nothing but cannibal zombies hiding among humans, so you can devour every last one of them. Hoff lunged at Kaimaru, throwing a powerful punch, but Kaimaru dodged it with ease. Calmly, Kaimaru replied, You've got it all wrong. We have a role here. We're guards, protecting people from the half-zombies. But Hoff wasn't in the mood for their explanations. He kept swinging, each punch carrying enough force to shatter concrete, but neither Kaimaru nor Kuchak let him land a hit. Then, in a flash, Hoff's mutant arm shifted again. Long, razor-sharp claws formed at the tips, and with a sudden dash, Hoff drove them straight into Kuchak. The blow made Kuchak run in pain, but Hoff wasn't done. He ripped his claws out, tearing the wound even further. Blood splattered everywhere, and Kuchak staggered, clearly affected. Hoff went for the same spot again, delivering another devastating strike. This time, Kuchak coughed up blood, his hulking form trembling. But Kaimaru didn't let Hoff keep the upper hand. In a blur of motion, he charged at Hoff, who tried to punch him again. Kaimaru dodged effortlessly, keeping his momentum, and grabbed Hoff by the leg. With a powerful swing, he slammed Hoff into the ground, then followed it up with a brutal kick that sent Hoff crashing into the wall. Before Hoff could recover, Kuchak came from behind and tried to crush him. But Hoff reacted quickly, using his massive arm to block the attack. The impact echoed through the room, and Kuchak snarled in frustration. Kaimara didn't let up, though. With a knife in hand, he pressed the attack, slashing and slicing with precision. Hoff skillfully blocked most of the strikes, but a few managed to graze him, leaving a shallow cut on his face. That's when Hoff noticed the weapon. A Kali knife, Hoff muttered under his breath. He could tell from Kaimara's movements. His attacks were calculated, refined. This wasn't the work of an amateur. Kaimara had been trained for years. The relentless onslaught didn't stop. Kaimar stayed on him, forcing Hoff on the defensive. Finally, in a quick move, Kaimaru slashed across Hoff's chest, leaving a deep wound. Hoff staggered but tried to regain his footing. Then, without warning, Kaimaru plunged the knife into Hoff's chest. Kaimaru looked at him coldly and said, "You'll succumb to death the second you let up on your tension." That phrase hit Hoff like a truck. He froze mid-breath, his eyes widening. He'd heard it before, years ago, back in the E-Project facility. And then it clicked. "You," Hoff said, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and realization. "You're the FN-30 subject." Kaimaru didn't reply, but the chilling look in his eyes told Hoff everything he needed to know. The lucky boy, the same child who had smiled while being burned alive, was standing before him now, transformed, unrecognizable, and more dangerous than ever. Hoff stood there, stunned. The lucky boy was alive. Kaimarp smirked, reminding Hoff that it was his training back in the day that helped him survive and reach this point. Then he asked Hoff if he finally understood the basics of transformation. Turns out, this whole fight wasn't just a battle. It was a training session. Kaimaru broke it down step by step. Hyperventilation, fear, anxiety, and extreme emotions. These trigger a discharge of carbon dioxide in the body, spiking oxygen levels. This process leads to dizziness, sensory abnormalities, and even spasms in the limbs. Hoff nodded, confirming this is exactly what he felt earlier. Kaimarth continued, explaining that to become a half-zombie, a human's heart rate plays a big role. Without proper blood flow, the body can't maintain the transformation. Hoff needed to focus, take a deep breath, and increase his heart rate to the right level. While this varies between individuals, for most, this is how they unlock their half-zombie form. Then Kuchak chimed in, teasing Hoff, "Congrats, that's your level 1 half-zombie transformation lesson. But guess what? Part 2's about to start." Kuchak smirked and added that holding back his power to train Hoff had been a huge pain. Without hesitation, his form shifted again, this time into what he called full-scale battle mode. His presence alone was overwhelming. Before anything else could happen, the sound of gunfire interrupted them. Adam burst into the room, guns blazing, but the bullets had no effect on the half-zombies. Then, out of nowhere, Era joined the fight. Fully healed and wielding a shotgun, she didn't look happy to see what was happening to her father. Kuchak joked, "Do we need to train her too?" But Kaimark shook his head, explaining that there was no need. Era was already in fight mode. Era didn't waste time. She shot out the lights, plunging the room into complete darkness. But that didn't stop her. Using her insane speed, she darted behind Kaimaru and Kuchak, shooting both of them directly in the head, even in the pitch black. Her eyes seemed to have some kind of power, allowing her to see clearly in the dark. Era kept firing, forcing them back, shouting, "Anyone who messes with my family is gonna die." Before the situation could escalate further, the doctor entered the room with a group of survivors, shouting for everyone to stop fighting. He dropped a shocking revelation. Kaimaru and Kuchak were their guardians. Adam wasn't convinced. He pointed at them and yelled, "They're half-zombies. They killed Kelly and ate her." That's when the doctor revealed the truth. He explained that he and the survivors were the ones who gave Kelly to Kaimaru and Kuchak. It was part of a voluntary symbiotic relationship. The half-zombies didn't kill the living. They only consumed those who were already injured or had passed away during the fight against regular zombies. The doctor went on, explaining that Kelly had been sick. She was able to end her life peacefully, and her last meal had even been whale meat. Without Kaimaru and Kuchak's protection, the survivors wouldn't have made it this far. Then Jeremy, Kuchak's son, broke down in tears. He explained that Kelly had been quiet that morning, and he thought she was just sleeping, but she had already passed away. It all started to make sense. Kaimaru and Kuchak weren't the villains here. They were protectors, doing what they had to in order to ensure the group's survival. But just as the tension started to ease, a mysterious figure entered the scene, flanked by guards. Without warning, they killed one of the survivors. Russell found it hilarious. A group of humans and half-zombies working together and managing to survive all the way up here. He couldn't believe it. But there's something about Russell you need to know. He and his men came from the infamous A-Zone. That's a place you don't just survive. You conquer it to leave alive. Out of nowhere, Russell's men started shooting, causing chaos. Kaimaru and the others were ready to jump in, but Russell raised his hand, stopping them. He smirked and explained it was all a misunderstanding. His men weren't aiming at anyone. They were just shooting blindly because they couldn't see in the dark. Kaimaru, always thinking ahead, told Kuchak to take the others outside and figure out what was going on out there. He promised to stay behind and handle the situation with Russell. But Russell wasn't about to let that happen. With a sharp order, he commanded his men to shut the door, sealing everyone inside. Before anyone could react, one of his men stepped forward and killed the doctor. Russell coldly explained, "I'm taking over from here." He pulled out a strange capsule shaped like a bullet and, without hesitation, injected himself with it. Kuchak, enraged, stepped up to face him. But Russell didn't flinch, not even a little. As Kuchak lunged, aiming to slam Russell into the ground, Russell moved with precision, easily dodging the attack. In one swift motion, he grabbed Kuchak by the horn and delivered a devastating kick. The force of it shattered Kuchak's jaw, even though he was in his hulking form. The sight left everyone stunned, especially Jeremy, who stood there, speechless, unable to comprehend what just happened. There's more to this story, though. Russell's strength and confidence weren't just random. He had a history, a long, complicated one, with Kuchak's family. Kuchak hit the ground hard, crashing in front of his son, Jeremy. Despite the brutal landing, Kuchak tried to reassure his son. "I'm fine, it's just a scratch," he said, even though it was clear he was barely holding on. But Russell wasn't done. He walked over and stomped on Kuchak, glaring down at Jeremy. "Your dad is as good as dead," Russell sneered, his voice full of malice. He then ordered Jeremy to come to him. Jeremy, trembling in fear, stuttered, "Gee, go away. You killed my mom, murderer." Russell smirked and leaned closer. "Come here, or do you want to die like she did?" he threatened. Jeremy's body froze, and the fear overwhelmed him, causing him to wet himself. In that moment, Jeremy's mind raced back to the past. His memories of Russell were a nightmare he could never escape. He remembered being locked in a house for 3 whole days. The place was filthy, and no environment for a child. Jeremy's body was covered in bruises and marks, evidence of constant beatings. And the person responsible for it all? Russell. One day, Jeremy's mom, Stephanie, brought Russell home with her. The truth about her affair with Russell became clear. She was cheating on Kuchak. But Stephanie wasn't herself. She was a drug addict, spiraling deeper into a mess she couldn't control. Russell opened the fridge and found it empty. No beer. His face darkened as he turned to Stephanie. "You drank it all, didn't you? You bitch," he snapped. Stephanie rushed to the sink, gagging. "I don't drink beer," she mumbled through her vomit. Russell's eyes landed on a pile of beer cans near Jeremy. His expression twisted. "So it was you," he growled. Jeremy's mom lost her temper and yelled at him. "Why didn't you flush the toilet?" Before Jeremy could respond, Russell slapped him hard across the face. Stephanie tried to intervene, stepping in between them. "He's just a kid. Calm down, baby." But calling him baby only fueled Russell's rage. He turned on Stephanie, hitting her too. "Don't you ever call me that again." Jeremy, shaking and sobbing, begged for forgiveness. "I drank the beers. I was thirsty. Miss Jimmy shut off our water, and I couldn't go outside because the door was locked. Even after hearing this, his mom slapped him again, scolding him for touching Russell's beer. And then it happened. Russell, filled with anger, grabbed both Jeremy and Stephanie and threw them out of the apartment like they were nothing. Meanwhile, inside the courthouse, Kuchak was on trial, standing before the judge with an air of frustration. His lawyer laid out the case, painting a picture of a man pushed to his limits. The lawyer explained how, while Kuchak was deployed overseas, serving his country, his wife, Stephanie, had fallen deep into a life of chaos. She used and sold drugs, got involved in illegal gambling, cheated on her husband, and completely neglected their son, Jeremy, who desperately needed care and love from his parents. As a man who sacrificed everything for his country and his family, Kuchak dreamed of a simple, happy life, the lawyer said passionately. Despite being a soldier, he wanted nothing more than to protect his family. This court cannot ignore the realities he faced as a husband and father. But the opposing lawyer wasn't having it. The defense is attempting to justify murder, he said coldly, and under no circumstances can murder be justified. Before Kuchak's lawyer could counter, Kuchak had had enough. His terrifying gaze locked on the judge. "You know what pisses me off the most?" he growled. "That I didn't get to kill my wife myself after she cheated on me. And you, every single one of you. You separated me from my son and locked me away like a caged animal." The courtroom fell silent as Kuchak let out a chilling grin. "If I ever get out," he said, his voice low and full of menace, "it'll be the end of all of you." The judge, visibly shaken, didn't hesitate. "Kuchak, you are sentenced to death." Fast forward 6 months later, just 3 hours before the nuclear plant explosion. Chaos had already engulfed the prison. Zombies swarmed every corner, infecting anyone they could get their hands on. If you were bitten, you were as good as gone. One of the prison guards, desperate to escape, found himself cornered by the undead. With nowhere to run, he made a snap decision. He darted into a cell and locked himself inside. But inside that cell was Kuchak. The guard panicked and pulled out his gun, aiming it at Kuchak. Before he could fire, Kuchak moved with inhuman speed, grabbing the guard's neck and twisting it violently. The crack echoed through the cell, and the guard's lifeless body hit the floor. Now free, Kuchak wasted no time. He escaped the prison, fighting through hordes of zombies, and eventually made his way back to what was once his home. And then, before Kuchak could do anything, Russell threw Stephanie and Jeremy out of the window. Kuchak didn't waste a second. He rushed to his son, Jeremy, scooping him up into his arms. Tears streamed down his face as he held the boy tightly. "Daddy's here," he whispered, his voice shaking. Despite falling from such a height, Jeremy was still alive, somehow, against all odds. But there was no time to rest. The sound of the undead grew louder as they closed in. Kuchak placed Jeremy inside a nearby car, locking him in to keep him safe. He stood guard outside, firing at the swarming zombies with precision, clearing a path as he made his way towards Stephanie. When he reached her, it was clear. Stephanie wasn't going to make it. Her injuries were too severe. Yet, in that moment, Kuchak's grief was overshadowed by his burning rage. He aimed his gun at her, and, driven by the betrayal and pain she had caused him, he pulled the trigger. Again and again. Even as chaos erupted around him, Kuchak laughed, a chilling, maniacal laugh, as if all the years of anger and hurt had finally boiled over. But the zombies weren't done. They surged toward the car where Jeremy was hiding, clawing at the windows. Others lunged at Kuchak, dragging him to the ground, their teeth tearing into him. And then, it happened. The nuclear plant exploded. The entire area was engulfed in a fiery blast, a blinding light swallowing everything in its path. Back to the present, Kuchak didn't hold back. He grabbed Russell, lifting him with pure rage, and told Lucky Boy to cover Jeremy's eyes because things were about to get ugly. But Jeremy? His eyes turned red, burning with anger. He didn't want to look away, not when the man who destroyed his family was standing right in front of him. Kuchak couldn't help but feel proud. "That's my boy," he thought, "the son of a soldier." Without wasting a second, Kuchak started slamming Russell into the ground, over and over and over again. The sound of bones crunching echoed through the room. Hoff quickly stepped in, covering Jeremy's eyes, saying, "This is grown-up business, kid." But he leaned down and made a promise to Jeremy, "We'll protect you, no matter what." Jeremy couldn't hold back his tears. For the first time in forever, he felt safe, cared for. Kuchak wasn't done. After slamming Russell into the ground repeatedly, he threw him into the wall with a force that made the entire room shake. Then, without hesitation, Kuchak's hand transformed into a deadly long blade. It was clear he was ready to end it, once and for all. Hoff stepped forward, trying to reason with him. "That's enough." Slamming him that many times should have been enough to finish the job. But Kuchak wasn't having it. "Do you know where we are? We're in a zombie den. You don't leave anything half done here." And just then, Russell, who had taken every brutal hit, stood up. Bloodied but grinning like a maniac, he started laughing. Kuchak didn't hesitate. He dashed forward and stabbed Russell with his blade, aiming to end it right there. But Russell? He just laughed. He grabbed the blade, holding it in place, and started walking toward Kuchak, forcing the blade deeper into his own body. The guy was completely unfazed. Then, out of nowhere, he lunged, trying to bite Kuchak. Sensing something was off, Kai jumped in, stopping Russell just in time and yelling for Kuchak to pull his blade out. But before he could, Russell leaped again and sank his teeth into Kuchak's arm, ripping out a chunk. Kuchak roared in rage and punched Russell back with everything he had, sending him flying. But the damage was done. Half-zombies don't feel pain, but whatever Russell did was different. Kuchak's face twisted in agony. This wasn't normal. Desperate to finish him off, Kuchak charged again, slamming Russell into the wall. Humans and half-zombies alike started unloading bullets into Russell, but nothing worked. He just stood there, laughing through the chaos. Kuchak's pain kept getting worse. His arm wasn't healing. It was rotting. He couldn't control it, and the pain was unbearable. That's when Lucky Boy spoke up, dropping a terrifying truth bomb. Russell isn't just a zombie. He's beyond that. He's an ultimate predator. He feasts on half-zombies. Lucky Boy explained that every cell in Russell's body had been zombified. He recovers instantly from any injury. He doesn't feel pain, no matter how brutal the beating. And now, Kuchak's arm. It's done for. The rot was spreading, and Kuchak's strength was fading fast. Furious, Kuchak charged at Russell, grabbing him with everything he had. But Russell wasn't fazed. He countered by snapping Kuchak's arm like a twig. Then, as if that wasn't enough, Russell grabbed Kuchak's horns and broke them clean off. The mighty Kuchak reverted to his human form, his body rapidly rotting away from Russell's infection. Jeremy, in tears, ran to his father, sobbing as he held him. But Kai wasn't about to let this slide. He revealed his full transformation. His red armor now completely covered his face, and two menacing tentacles with spiked tips emerged from his back. Moving at lightning speed, Kai zipped behind Russell and launched an attack with his tentacles. Russell, however, was even faster. He dodged every strike effortlessly, his movements precise and calculated. Then, in a split second, he countered by leaping toward Kai, trying to bite him. But Kai managed to dodge just in time. Russell quickly regained his footing and retaliated, landing a solid hit on Kai, knocking him back. With an eerie calm, Russell dashed toward Jeremy. He spoke, his voice dripping with manipulation. "I'm not the one who killed your mom. The one who neglected her and you. That's the real killer. Your father, Kuchak." As he got closer, Russell tried to attack Kuchak with the horn he had broken off from him, ready to finish him off. But before he could strike, Era intervened. With precise timing, she fired her shotgun, hitting Russell squarely. Even though he wasn't supposed to feel pain, Era's shotgun shell managed to hurt him, just a little. Angered, Russell turned and slammed Era, sending her flying backward. Russell didn't hold back. He stabbed Kuchak right in the heart. The once mighty soldier fell, leaving Jeremy screaming in despair. Hoff, despite being exhausted, charged at Russell with all he had. He threw a punch, But Russell held his ground and blocked it effortlessly with his arm. Not one to give up, Hoff grabbed Russell's arm, trying to crush it with sheer force. But Russell, being the monster he was, didn't feel a thing. With an eerie grin, Russell countered with a powerful punch. Hoff skillfully blocked it, but the impact was too much, and it sent him staggering for a moment. Russell wasted no time, following up with a brutal kick that launched Hoff straight into the wall. Hoff, more concerned about Era than himself, let his guard down. Russell saw his opening and grabbed him. Just as things looked bleak, Kai jumped in, launching another assault. But Russell was quick. He dodged by lowering his head and stayed one step ahead. Russell then stomped on Hoff's head, immobilizing him, and turned his attention to Kai. With terrifying precision, Russell grabbed one of Kai's tentacles mid-attack. Kai tried to counter, lowering his body to escape. But that's exactly what Russell was waiting for. In a flash, Russell got behind Kai, ripped both of his tentacles off, and tore them apart like they were nothing. Kai screamed in agony, blood pouring everywhere. The situation was growing more desperate by the second. But here's the kicker. This wasn't just a battle being fought in the room. Hidden cameras were recording everything, and watching it all unfold were two familiar figures, Cazelle and the mysterious woman who had stolen Rocker. And trust me, from this point on, the story is about to get even more intense. The ship sailed forward, cutting through a sea of blood. The air was thick with despair. Kai tried to stand, but Russell was quicker. He lunged forward and bit a chunk out of Kai's neck. It was brutal. Cazelle watched everything unfold through the monitors. With a cold smirk, he muttered that if Russell wiped them all out, he'd be disappointed. Why? Because this wasn't just any ship. It was one of Cazelle's experimental fields, something he had prepared in advance. As the infection spread, Kai's zombie form began to fade. The same thing was happening to Kuchak, whose body was rapidly deteriorating. That's when the truth came out. Russell's teeth carried a variant virus. It wasn't just any infection. This virus disrupted the antibodies of half-zombies, effectively stripping them of their strength and turning them into regular zombies. Chaos erupted. Russell's guards, fully armed, started firing at the survivors and half-zombies without hesitation. Bullets flew everywhere. In the middle of it all, Jeremy tried to run forward, but the guards didn't hesitate. They opened fire. Adam jumped in to shield him, but both Adam and Jeremy were shot. They fell, lifeless, as their blood pooled beneath them. Kuchak, barely able to stand, dragged himself to his son's side. He picked up Jeremy's small body and held him close, tears streaming down his face. He sobbed, apologizing over and over, saying he had failed to protect him. Then, the guards aimed at Kuchak and pulled the trigger. He fell next to his son, his life fading away. Hoff, witnessing all of this, froze. But then, Lucky Boy's words echoed in his mind. Hyperventilation, extreme emotions, fear, dizziness, spasms, and that insatiable hunger. Hoff reached down and grabbed a piece of human flesh. Even Cazelle, the mastermind watching from afar, wanted Hoff to eat that human flesh. And when Hoff finally gave in, everything changed. As he took a bite, his breathing intensified. His heart pumped furiously, and his entire body underwent a terrifying transformation. This wasn't just some ordinary boost. This was metamorphosis. Within moments, Hoff unleashed his newfound power. He tore through the guards like they were nothing, shredding them apart before they even realized what was happening. It was brutal, chaotic, and absolutely unstoppable. Then, as if driven by pure instinct, Hoff grabbed one of the fallen soldiers and devoured their flesh. Cazelle, watching this all unfold, couldn't hide his shock. Hoff's transformation was nothing like he'd expected. It was raw, primal, and fueled by pure hunger. The room filled with Hoff's deafening roar as blood painted the walls and air. But here's the thing. Hoff had completely lost himself in the chaos. He couldn't tell friend from foe, left from right. All he knew was one thing. The real threat standing before him was Russell. Russell wasn't about to back down either. In a desperate move, he pulled out a strange capsule, clearly planning to inject himself and gain even more power. But Hoff wasn't about to let that happen. With terrifying speed, Hoff lunged forward. One hit, that's all it took. Hoff's strike crushed Russell's head into nothingness, leaving behind a splatter of blood and silence. Hoff's rampage suddenly came to a halt, and Russell wasted no time rubbing it in. He explained that Hoff had just lost the power boost he gained from eating flesh. Right then, Russell's men opened fire, staggering Hoff. Using the opportunity, Russell injected himself with a mysterious serum, empowering himself even more. Now supercharged, Russell leapt forward, his body regenerating at an insane speed. His teeth grew back, sharp and deadly, and he sank them into Hoff, injecting the variant virus. But instead of panicking, Hoff just smirked and mocked Russell. "Is that all you've got?" With raw strength, Hoff grabbed Russell by the head again. This time, he wasn't holding back. He crushed Russell's head with brutal force, blood and bones splattering everywhere. Hoff sneered one last time, "See you in hell, kiddo," before completely obliterating Russell's skull into nothingness. But Hoff wasn't done. His hunger still raged. So he did the unthinkable. He devoured Russell's body whole, every last bit. Watching from afar, Cazell was awestruck by what he had just witnessed. This wasn't just strength. It was something far beyond. And then, the story shifted back 3 months ago, right after the nuclear plant explosion. Let's rewind. Around 30,000 people had fled the zombie outbreak and radiation, desperate to survive. They all crowded onto a massive ship called Noah, a vessel only designed to hold 10,000. The conditions were horrific. Within 3 days, 95% of the people on board had turned into zombies, leaving just 5% to survive the carnage. But it didn't end there. Of the survivors, 0.1% mutated due to the radiation, transforming into half-zombies. These were no ordinary beings. They were stronger, faster, and more resilient. But even among them, Hoff was special. His power outclassed everyone else, making him a true force of nature. The woman with Cazell couldn't help but criticize the politicians. If only they'd been a little more patient, they could have witnessed this grand spectacle. But Cazell wasn't fazed. To him, the experiment was far from over. Back on the ship, Hoff carried his daughter, Era, and confronted the guards. "Who are you?" he demanded. One of the guards, trembling, explained they worked for Cazell but didn't know where Cazell was hiding. He added that they'd been captured by Russell 2 months ago and had been forced to join his crew out of fear for their lives. All right, let's rewind the clock and dive into how we ended up here, because this backstory is wild. So, it all began after Cazell gave this really heartfelt speech. It must have been convincing because 3 key figures pledged their support for Cazell's E-project. Yul Muing, the Vice Minister of National Defense; Michael Jackson, a Reformist Party senator; Richard Valle, the CEO of a broadcasting company. As the group walked, Michael made this big statement about how they all cared for the nation's prosperity and its citizens. Instead of agreeing, Cazell just started laughing. Not a chuckle, but a full-on laugh. And let me tell you, this wasn't the kind of laugh that makes you feel good. It was the kind that sent chills down their spines. Realizing he might have freaked them out, Cazell apologized, saying it had been a long time since he'd heard something so idealistic. Then Michael casually brought up that the presidential election was in 3 months. That's when Cazell's partner, the white-haired woman, dropped a bombshell. They had already funneled Phoenix Group's funds into the Republican Party's campaign. Michael could use it whenever he needed. Before they parted ways, Cazell made a bold promise to Michael: "You'll be president soon enough." And guess what? A little while later, Michael became president. But, and this is a big but, it was all part of Cazell's plan. Fast forward to Phoenix Group's basement lab, and things were getting dark. Cazell and his team were conducting experiments that were straight out of a nightmare. One nervous researcher finally spoke up, clearly terrified. He explained that most of the soldiers involved in their experiments were aging rapidly and turning into zombies, thanks to a mutant virus. He kept going, sweat dripping as he laid it all out. They had been using prisoners, war orphans, death row inmates, basically anyone the government secretly handed over to them, and even clones created in their labs. But none of it was enough. On top of that, researchers were quitting left and right, breaking under the weight of what they were doing. They started leaking the truth to the press and social media. Here's the kicker, though. All of this chaos, It was exactly what Cazelle wanted. As the researcher finished, shaking like a leaf, Cazelle didn't even flinch. He didn't care. Instead, the white-haired woman dropped more bad news. The government had issued a notice saying they were cutting funding. The broadcasting companies, the press, everyone was turning their backs on them. And what did Cazelle do? He laughed again. But this time, he wasn't apologizing. With a smirk, he declared, "If they're our enemies, we must kill them all." That's when the researchers realized they were completely screwed. Cazelle, unfazed, started outlining the next phase of his twisted plans. He pointed out they had data on marmots that had successfully passed the first experiment. They still had zombies, too. And then, with a wicked grin, he made the announcement that would change everything. The real experiment begins now. In order to boost the success rate of his experiments, Cazelle decided to take things to the extreme. He turned an entire city of 6 million people into his personal laboratory. That's right, the city became ground zero for his horrifying experiments. He unleashed mutant and variant zombie viruses created by Phoenix, using the outbreak to his advantage. On top of that, Cazelle made sure the nuclear plant explosion was part of the plan, pushing things even further. And if that wasn't enough, they added radiation to the mix, making sure the environment was as lethal as possible. It was the perfect storm for his experiments, and Cazelle was about to reap the rewards. Now, Cazelle wasn't just focused on his experiments, he was out for revenge. Remember those politicians who betrayed him? He wasn't going to let them off the hook. First up, he sent Russell after Richard Valle, the CEO of a broadcasting company. In a tense scene, Russell and his soldiers barged into Valle's office, pointed guns at him, and forced him to make a broadcast. Valle had to tell the citizens the grim truth. All airports and roads were shut down due to the zombie outbreak, and everyone had to evacuate immediately. He told them to leave the city through the nearest terminals or public transportation. The moment Valle finished his broadcast, Russell didn't hesitate. He shot him in the head. One down. Next was President Michael, who had already turned into a zombie. He was eating his daughter when Cazelle's soldiers stormed in to finish the job, killing him, even in his zombified state. Finally, Yul Muing, the Vice Minister of National Defense, somehow managed to stay alive. He was lucky, because if he hadn't, he would have been dead too. Cazelle and his team watched all of this unfold from the rooftop of a tall building, looking down on the city as it descended into total chaos. He had bigger plans in mind. He wanted to gather those with dominant genes, people who could fight their way through the sea of zombies. Those survivors were meant to board Ship Noah, the last chance for humanity. And then, boom, the nuclear explosion went off. This is where everything began, the catalyst for Cazelle's twisted vision. He wasn't just trying to survive. He wanted to create a new humankind, a new generation that would rise from the ashes of the old world. As the ship moved forward, things got intense. Out of nowhere, zombies started crawling out of the Red Sea, climbing up the ship like it was nothing. But these weren't your typical zombies. Some were stronger than the others. One of them let out a deafening roar as it stood beneath the red moon, signaling that things were about to get even worse. Meanwhile, Hoff was patching up Kai, along with Kara and Adam. It turns out that Kai's half-zombie powers were fading away because of the virus he was infected with. His wounds? Well, they weren't healing at all. Hoff informed him that everyone was dead except for Era and Adam. And then, Hoff asked the big question. How did Kai even manage to survive all of this chaos? Now, things are about to get even crazier. Lucky Boy, who somehow managed to escape from the burning room, was out for revenge. He was hunting down the people responsible for all the suffering the subjects had gone through. One by one, he took them down, and now, he was heading for the final targets, the father and the mother. But before he could finish the job, he killed the father, and now only the baby and the mom were left. The mom, who had been involved in burning the subjects to death, was desperate, begging Lucky Boy not to kill her baby. But here's where it gets chilling. The baby in Kai's hands started crying. With a terrifying look on his face, Kai pointed at the woman and said, "You're scared I might kill him, you know?" The woman broke down, crying, begging Kai to spare her baby. She apologized over and over again, saying that they never thought of the experimental subjects as real people, just things to be used for their experiments. They didn't see them as beings capable of thought, they just followed orders. She was desperate, pleading for her baby's life. But Kai, feeling the weight of everything he'd been through, left the baby behind and killed the woman. He was focused on his revenge, determined to make those responsible pay for what they did to him and others like him. Kai's journey didn't stop there. He stormed into the laboratory, taking down everyone in his path. The rage and pain from his past fueled his every move. But then he found something that shocked him to his core, something that hit too close to home. He stumbled into his old crib, his shelter, his home. And then, the twist. He made his way to the chief researcher's office and began going through the data on the computer. That's when we learned something devastating. Jessie, Hoff's wife, who had died earlier in the story, was also part of the Phoenix group. She was one of the researchers. Kai stared at the screen in disbelief. Jessie, the one he had looked to for comfort, for refuge, for a mother figure, was the same person who had abandoned him. To her, he was nothing more than one of her subjects, someone to be discarded when the experiment was over. The last message she left for him? To be forgotten, thrown away like all the others. This was the moment everything clicked for Kai. He wasn't just seeking revenge for what they did to him. This was deeply personal. Jessie had been his everything, and now, he was using that pain to fuel his rage against everyone who played a part in his suffering. He was going to make them regret ever creating him. In the office, Kai found a picture of Jessie and Hoff, carrying their child, Rocker. That's when the truth hit him. Hoff and Jessie were married. It was a shocking revelation for Kai. As he dug deeper into the data on the other experimental subjects, he found something stunning, something that would change everything. But before Kai could dive further, Kazel's servant, who was no ordinary human, showed up. This wasn't just a normal opponent. The servant attacked with incredible speed and power, and Kai barely managed to dodge the first strike. The servant followed up with a powerful kick, and Kai tried to block it, but the impact was so strong that it broke his hand. This wasn't going to be an easy fight. Kai quickly realized he had to act fast. Without wasting any time, he grabbed the computer and threw it out of the window. He wasn't about to let Kazel's people get their hands on that data. The servant kept coming, relentless with his attacks, but Kai wasn't backing down. He jumped out of the window, falling from the 50th floor. But Kai knew exactly what he was doing. As he descended, he used his hand to steady himself, grabbing the side of the building, slowly making his way down. Then, out of nowhere, a bus came into view. Kai executed a perfect backflip, landing right on top of the bus. The whole move was precise and calculated, like it was all part of his plan. With the hard drive containing the crucial data in his hands, Kai made his escape. Kazel's servant, watching from above, was amused by how Kai managed to slip away from his grasp. Kazel's servant contacted his boss, giving him an update. All the researchers were dead except for one, the baby. Kazel, holding the picture of Hoff and Jessie with their child, stared at it for a moment before ordering his servant to return to the base. He looked at the picture, his grip tightening, before destroying the frame containing the photo. His anger was clear. Meanwhile, Jessie was speeding back home, her mind racing. As she approached, she saw her husband, Hoff, and Era outside, carrying groceries. Jessie yelled, asking where's Rocker? Then, Rocker woke up and came running to check what was going on outside. Jessie, overwhelmed with relief, rushed over and hugged her child, happy to see him safe. She asked Hoff how he could leave their son home alone. Hoff, calm as ever, explained that Rocker was fast asleep, so he didn't want to wake him. He had gone out with Era to get groceries. Jessie, hiding the truth, lied, saying she wasn't feeling well, so she left work early. But deep down, she already knew the chaos that Kazel had unleashed. However, the chaos hadn't reached them yet, and for a moment, everything seemed normal. But there was something more lurking in the shadows. Nearby, Kai was watching them. As he observed, his eyes landed on Era, and he was stunned. It turns out, Era wasn't just a regular child. She was an experimental subject too. Her code was FN 5A, and she was supposed to be dead. But somehow, she was still alive. As Kai continued to observe them, Jessie noticed him, and her instincts kicked in. She saw Kai watching from a distance. Hoff came over, telling Jesse to go inside and that he would prepare dinner. Back to the present, Kai asked Hoff about Jesse. Hoff was taken aback, asking how Kai knew about her. Kai explained that Jesse was his main doctor back at the Phoenix Group. Hoff, still confused, asked, "Even if you know about her, how do you know about the two of us?" Kai responded calmly, "Jesse always talked about her husband." Hoff, now starting to piece things together, recounted his story. He first met Jesse when she was sent to their unit from Phoenix Group. He fell in love with her the moment he saw her, and when he proposed, she said yes. Hoff explained that Jesse had always been skeptical about how the experimental subjects were treated and was the first researcher to leave Phoenix. And now, she was gone. But Kai, hearing all of this, realized something. Hoff was lied to by Jesse. He didn't know the full truth. Even Kai wasn't sure if Jesse was actually dead. Before they could discuss it further, Hoff heard a sound and went to investigate. As Hoff left, Era joined Kai. It turns out, Era and Kai knew each other. Both were experimental subjects, but Era had grown up to be incredibly pretty and developed normally. Unlike Kai, she didn't show any signs of aging. Here's the big twist. Era was thought to be dead after having a viral side effect, but the truth was, she was transferred to Hoff's home as his foster child. But what Hoff didn't know was that Era wasn't just his adopted daughter. She was secretly working under Kazel. Meanwhile, we see Kazel with his white-haired woman, and to everyone's shock, Rocker and Jesse, Hoff's wife, who was thought to be dead, was actually alive and working under Kazel as well. And then Kai revealed something even bigger. Hoff was a first-generation subject, something that left everyone questioning everything. Jesse, though, seemed to think they should have just killed Kai when they had the chance. As Hoff went to investigate the sound, he discovered something shocking: multiple zombies inside the ship. He couldn't understand how they managed to climb up there. As one of the zombies turned towards him, Hoff quickly transformed into his zombie form and started fighting them off. Meanwhile, Kai asked Era, "Does Hoff even know you're just toying with him?" Since Hoff was a first-generation experimental subject, the person in charge of them was none other than their mother, Jesse. As Hoff fought off the zombies, Kai revealed something unsettling. The house where Hoff and his family lived wasn't really a home at all. It was a fabricated lab, created for the sole purpose of testing the subjects from birth. They studied everything: eating habits, reproduction, behavior, everything. Watching all of this unfold, Rocker, Hoff's son, watched his dad fight in his zombie form and was completely stunned. Jesse, his mom, tried to manipulate his mind, telling him that Kazel was his real father and that Hoff was nothing more than a zombie now. Rocker's mind started to spiral with confusion. Let's rewind a bit and dive into Jesse's massive role in all of this. Kazel, the real mastermind behind everything, hired researchers to carry out zombie experiments on babies. But most of the experiments failed, with the subjects turning into complete zombies. And the head researcher behind all of this was none other than Jessie herself. While reviewing her calculations and propositions, Jessie grew frustrated. Her experiments weren't yielding consistent data, even though her calculations were flawless. Then, Kazel, her husband, walked in and confronted her. Yes, you heard that right. The real husband of Jessie is none other than the final boss, Kazel. Jessie broke down in tears, but Kazel reassured her, saying it was okay. But hold on, we're not done with the past just yet. We'll come back to that soon. Back to the present, Kai had something chilling to say about the zombies. Zombies, they're dead but never really die. He went on to explain that maybe Phoenix Group started the entire project under the assumption that there was a secret to eternal life hidden within our bodies. After killing the zombies, Hoff walked toward the room where Kai and Era were. As he got closer, he overheard the entire conversation between them. Jessie started recalling a painful memory. It was the time when Kazel had confronted her. Kazel had told her that despite all the trial and error, their subjects, those created from scratch, were only half complete. But they had managed to make it this far. Beside them was a capsule labeled FN-07 Hoffman. That's right, Hoff himself, the only physically complete subject with the capability of reproduction. He was their greatest achievement up to that point. Jessie explained that they had reached the limit of their simulated experiments and couldn't afford any more variables. Everything needed to be precise, like a manufactured product. But Cazelle realized something: variables. He believed their last option was natural breeding, and that meant Jessie would have to be the host for their subjects. He insisted she was the only one who could find the final piece of the puzzle. Jessie didn't want this, but Cazelle reminded her that she had said they had reached their limit. He also pointed out that she was fully aware that he had always respected her opinions. Jessie tried to push back, saying it was because of how much she valued her work as a scholar. But Cazelle wasn't having it. He told her, "You've always done what you believed in, and I've always supported your decisions." Jessie, feeling emotional, hugged him, thanking him and apologizing for complaining so much. Cazelle smiled and reassured her, saying, "That's nonsense. That's what husbands are for." They ended up following through with their plan, and Hoffman's family was established. Back in the present, Kai told Era that now she could kill him. Era, without hesitation, stabbed him. But to her surprise, Kai laughed, saying, "Your hand is warm." Just then, Hoff entered the room, and he heard everything. When Hoff entered the room, Era quickly shoved Kai against the wall, pretending to still be Hoff's daughter. She immediately tried to play the victim, claiming that she had brought Kai some water and that Kai had tried to kill her. But Hoff wasn't fooled. He knew that Kai couldn't even lift a finger. When Kai addressed Hoff as FN 07, that's when things got interesting. You see, Jessie had ordered Era to kill Kai, and without hesitation, she transformed her hand into a weapon and dashed forward to strike. But Hoff stopped her in her tracks. Era quickly freed her hand and tried to punch Hoff, but he dodged it with ease, effortlessly pushing her back. The twist? Kai and Hoff had planned all of this. Kai had already informed Hoff that someone would be coming to kill him the moment Hoff left the room. And just like that, the plan played out perfectly. Hoff stood there, telling Era that he had heard everything from outside the room. When Era asked him if he was going to kill her now, Hoff calmly responded, "Why would I kill you? We're family." Then Hoff began to share his past with her. He recounted what his stepdad always told him about his life. How he was abandoned during the war, grew up in a refugee camp, and was adopted by his stepdad, an army surgeon. Once Hoff got older, he joined as a mercenary after seeing the horrors of war. He lost his memory in a suicide bombing, and his stepdad drilled that story into him, over and over again. But now, Hoff was starting to realize the truth. He wasn't just any soldier. He was the first-generation experimental subject. Hoff then turned to Era and asked, "Is Jessie alive?" Era answered, "You're the one who killed Jessie, even though deep down, she knew Jessie was alive." Now, remember the beginning when Jessie was infected? He thought she was dead, but here's the twist. Jessie wasn't really dead. She had been acting the whole time. When she tried to shoot herself, Hoff knocked the gun away before she could pull the trigger. He thought he could save her, that if she was alive, no matter the virus or contamination, he could bring her back. So, he left her there, thinking he would return. What Hoff didn't know was that it was all part of Jessie's plan. Then, Kai dropped the bombshell. Jessie wasn't dead. In fact, she had full control over all the half-zombie data and information. She could manipulate it however she wanted. And on top of that, Jessie was the supreme version of all half-zombies. She had experimented on 6 million people, and even on herself. Kai revealed that Jessie was the second Eve of this new world, a true psychopath with reckless ambition. But the real shocker? Jessie wasn't just a mad scientist. She was the original creator of the half-zombies, the very god that these subjects followed. Let's take a deeper look at why Cazelle is doing all of this. One day, Cazelle was at his vacation home with his wife Jessie. Jessie came in, congratulating her dogs, Punch and Pink, for having 7 puppies. Cazelle, however, was in a darker mood. He grabbed one of the puppies and said, "I have everything a human can desire," but in truth, he felt like nothing but an empty shell, an illusion. He began crushing the puppy in his hands. Punch, the father dog, tried to bite Cazelle to protect his son. But Cazelle was cold. He grabbed Punch's mouth and used a gun to kill him. Pink and her puppies trembled, making whimpering sounds. Cazelle casually threw one of Pink's puppies aside and grabbed a picture frame. It was his wedding picture with Jessie. Cazelle was, in his mind, the master of this world, But there was something he couldn't possess, something he desperately wanted. He couldn't have a child of his own. Gazelle was infertile, and that devastated him. On top of that, his age was catching up with him, and he had no legacy to leave behind. He wanted immortality, eternal life, and he couldn't bear the thought of dying without passing something on. He turned to Jessie, reminding her of her promise that she would give him the key to eternal life. He even offered her as a sacrifice to Hoff, demanding his reward. Meanwhile, Era explained to Hoff that if he killed her and overcame that hurdle, he might finally be able to see Rocker and Jessie again. Hoff asked her what role she had in all of this, and Era replied, to eradicate. Without hesitation, she leaped at Hoff. Jessie didn't want her son, Rocker, to witness his father being killed by Era, so she ordered one of the servants to take him to his room. But before she could carry it out, Gazelle stopped her. He patted Rocker's head, telling him, "You need to be strong. This is the last time you'll be able to see your father." Era was relentlessly landing hits on Hoff, who refused to fight back. He considered her his daughter and couldn't bring himself to strike her. As this was happening, Rocker started crying. Jessie tried to reason with Gazelle, explaining that exposing Rocker to so much stress wasn't good for him. But Era, determined to end things, lunged at Hoff again. She warned him that if he didn't kill her, Rocker would die. Despite the threat, Hoff didn't strike. Era then stabbed him, her blade piercing his chest. But as Rocker cried out, something strange began to happen. A mysterious aura surrounded him, but just as Era was about to pierce Hoff's heart, she hesitated. At the last second, she turned her blade aside. Era, frustrated, told Hoff, "If you can't do better than this, everyone's going to die." Hoff, holding Era's hand, declared that he would not attack her. Era didn't hold back. She leaped forward, landing a punch on Hoff, then followed it up with a stomp that sent him crashing to the ground. But she wasn't done. She kept stomping on him, her anger building. Then, in a shocking move, Era transformed her hand into a blade and tried to stab him. But Hoff, quick on his feet, used his hand as a shield, protecting his vital spots. As this went on, Rocker's aura began to grow stronger. His eyes turned red, and blood started streaming from them as he cried. It was clear that something deep inside him was awakening. Then Gazelle stepped in, grabbing Rocker just like he had done with the baby dog in the past. He held him firmly, almost as if he were reminding everyone of his control. Seeing this, Jessie snapped. She tried to attack Gazelle, desperate to protect her son. But just as she moved, the white-haired woman intervened, blocking her path. But Jessie wasn't about to back down. She revealed her true form, transforming into a zombie, with tentacles emerging from her back. Her eyes glowed with fury as she prepared to eliminate anyone who dared to hurt her child. Hoff looked at Era with a serious expression. "If you didn't kill me, would you just end up discarded, like Kai?" he asked. Era quickly pulled out her blade and dashed backward, preparing for another strike. But Hoff wasn't done. He transformed into his zombie form, standing tall and challenging her. Dominant and inferior? Who decided that? He paused, his eyes softening. "I think of you as my daughter, and I would never harm you. I won't let anyone who wants to discard you get their way." Jessie was facing off against the white-haired woman, using her tentacles to attack. But the woman was fast, dodging them easily. Jessie didn't give up, though. She tried to counter with swift slashes, but the woman anticipated each move, even transforming her leg into a mutant blade, which she used to slice through Jessie's tentacles before they could land. As the battle continued, Hoff turned back to Era, his voice calm but firm. "Even if Jessie tricked me, I know she had her reasons. But if Gazelle is sacrificing my family to achieve his goals, he's going to pay for it." Gazelle was growing more impatient. He grabbed Rocker, choking him, and sneered. "Family? What a crock of shit." Gazelle kept tightening his grip around Rocker's neck, his face cold and determined. Jessie couldn't hold back anymore. She dashed toward Gazelle, furious, but the white-haired woman was ready. She predicted every one of Jessie's moves, dodging and even slashing at Jessie's tentacles. However, Jessie wasn't done yet. She quickly adapted, getting behind the woman and slashing with rapid strikes, forcing her back against the wall. But the white-haired woman wasn't out of the fight. She tried to counter, but Jessie stopped her attack, grabbing her, and ripped off the woman's blade-like leg in one swift motion. Then, Jessie turned her focus back to Kazel. She leaped forward to attack, but Kazel dodged the strike with ease. In an instant, he was behind her, ready to strike. But Jessie wasn't slow. She recovered her balance and started launching another series of attacks. But Kazel was too fast, dodging her every move. Kazel then used Rocker as a shield, forcing Jessie to stop her assault. With no hesitation, he pushed her toward the white-haired woman, who was now preparing to attack Jessie from behind. Jessie quickly used her arm to block the white-haired woman's attack, but the impact still left her injured. The woman then landed a punch, sending Jessie reeling. As she staggered back, Jessie expressed her regret for ever being part of all of this. In a desperate move, she grabbed Rocker from Kazel and ran, retreating backward. But she wasn't done fighting. From her back, Jessie launched mutant blades toward Kazel. The white-haired woman leaped forward, defending him, but despite her efforts, one of the blades found its mark and struck Kazel's eye. Then, Jessie pressed a button, and a loud, massive sound echoed throughout the ship. It was clear something big was about to happen. Through telepathy, Jessie called out to Era, telling her to get her uncle and bring him up here. Hearing Jessie's voice, Hoff was relieved and glad to know his wife was still alive. Jessie's voice came through, instructing him to gather Era and Kai and come to her location. But Kazel had other plans. He ordered someone to bring Hoff and the others to him. And that's when we learned the shocking truth. Adam Smith, the 65-year-old man who had been working with Kazel, had undergone some kind of transformation. His body was now as massive as the Hulk, and he appeared behind Era. With a brutal move, Adam called out defects and smashed his fist into Era's shoulder. After smashing Era's shoulder, Adam grabbed it and broke it with a sickening crack. Hoff immediately leaped forward, trying to protect her, but Adam was too powerful. He kicked Hoff back with ease. Era, determined not to back down, spun around and tried to attack Adam with her blade. But Adam was ready. He easily anticipated her move and pushed her toward Hoff, leaving her open. Before they could react, Adam dashed forward and landed a punch on Hoff. He grabbed Hoff's head and slammed it hard into the wall. Hoff was overwhelmed by Adam's strength, barely able to recover. In a blind rage, Era dashed at Adam, but something was different this time. Adam's voice and face started to change. Multiple faces appeared and merged together, before revealing his true form. The shocking truth was finally out. Adam wasn't just a transformed man. He was FN-01, the doctor who had been involved in Era's experiments. And now, he was ready to face them with a power that seemed unstoppable. Leonid started stomping on Kai, making it clear that no one could get past him. Then, in a shocking twist, Leonid's face began to change, transforming into Hoff's stepdad. It seemed Leonid had also played the role of Hoff's stepdad all along. As Leonid spoke, he explained Kazel's plan. He wanted to create a new generation of mankind, one that would learn from the mistakes of the past. According to Leonid, humans didn't deserve freedom of will. Kai, with a defiant laugh, didn't seem scared of death. Instead, he pointed out the true horror, the existence of the half-zombies. He asked, once they die, would there be a place for them? Would some being greet them? Leonid, cold and unforgiving, responded that defects like them would only meet extinction here. Hoff couldn't hold back anymore. He lunged at Leonid, but Leonid dodged his attacks, using his words to lecture about freedom of will, the greatest gift God had given to humans. He explained that the first humankind perished from self-indulgence, but now humanity could learn from those mistakes and evolve. As Leonid tried to punch Hoff, Hoff skillfully avoided it, then countered with a powerful strike. Hoff scoffed at Leonid's delusional belief in the pursuit of something that would never exist, eternal life. The two squared off, each of them expressing their beliefs. Leonid believed that the half-zombies were evolving magnificently, growing closer to true humanity, even now. But Hoff had a different take. He countered, saying that altruism, the last message of hope, the final lesson humanity needed to learn, was the true answer. It was the dilemma Leonid would never solve. Then, With a fierce look in his eyes, Hoff covered his face with a transformation and leaped forward, ready to take the fight to the next level. Hoff managed to slice Leonid's shoulder, but Leonid just smiled. In a blink, his shoulder instantly regenerated. Era quickly warned Hoff to get back, telling him that Leonid was a resurrection-type half-zombie. But before Hoff could react, Leonid shoved him aside and grabbed Era. Then, in a brutal moment, Leonid stabbed Era's heart and ripped it out. With that, Era died. Hoff, filled with rage and sorrow, screamed in fury. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ship, Jesse pressed some buttons on the control panel. A strange liquid began raining down all over the ship from the inside. Jesse calmly explained that this experiment was a failure. The last key to eternal life, as promised by God, never truly existed. She started recalling everything she had done, especially after giving birth to Rocker. She had marveled at the miracle of life and maternal love. But when Cazell forced her to be the moderator and suggested replacing the origin of humanity through a second judgment, sacrificing 6 million people, Jessie had made up her mind. She was determined to tear down the Tower of Babel she had foolishly built in her wild dream. And so, everything played out just as Jessie had planned. She wanted to destroy Cazell's plan completely, and now she had succeeded. The liquid falling from the sky was a vaccine. One that would turn everyone on the ship back to how they were in the beginning. No more half-zombies, no more regeneration powers, no more extended lifespans. Everyone would return to being human. Then, the white-haired woman's face began to rot. Leonid and Hoff also returned to their human forms. The zombie forms dissolved completely. Leonid, now in his original shape and age, turned into an old man, his body as fragile as paper. Hoff wasted no time. He grabbed Leonid and crushed his face, ending his life for good. Leonid was dead. Kai died. Hoff gently closed his eyes, then grabbed the lifeless body of Era, crying and apologizing. With heartbreak in his chest, he dashed toward where Cazell was. Cazell's face began to age rapidly. Wrinkles appeared as his experiment that granted him eternal youth and extended life began to fade away. He still had a small amount of power left. In his fury, Cazell transformed his hand and slapped Jessie, dragging her across the floor. Jessie's face also started to show signs of aging, returning to her original form. As he dragged her, she told him that, in the end, they were all incomplete defects who would never reach completion. Cazell slammed her face against the control panel, but the vaccine kept spreading. The white-haired woman also turned into an old woman. Rocker shouted at Cazell to let his mother go, but Cazell just punched him. Then the vaccine stopped, and Jessie calmly explained that it had stopped because that was the end of it. Cazell, in his anger, used a blade and stabbed Jessie. At that moment, Hoff arrived at the scene. In a fit of rage, Hoff smashed the white-haired woman to the ground and rushed to hug his child, Rocker. He then turned his fury on Cazell, punching him repeatedly. After that, he cradled his wife, Jessie, trying to stop the bleeding by pressing his hand to her wound, but it was too late. With her final breath, Jessie apologized and thanked Hoff, telling him how much she loved their son. She also apologized to Rocker, telling him he was the most divine gift God had given her. Her last words were for Hoff to look after Rocker, and then she passed away. As Cazell stood up, he asked, "A family? Then what about me?" In his rage, he stabbed his own heart, ending his own life. With Cazell's death, Hoff's hair turned white, and wrinkles formed on his face. Eternal life. What's the meaning of it when you're left all alone, with nothing but memories of your loved ones buried in your heart? Hoff, carrying his dead wife and holding his child, stood amidst the devastation. Suddenly, a warship appeared before them. From behind, a lone zombie emerged, getting closer to Hoff and muttering that it wanted to eat. And with that, my friends, our story ended.